The easiest hearts to abandon are often the ones we spend a lifetime searching for. The great hall of Blackwood Keep shimmered beneath hundreds of candles, their golden light reflecting against polished stone and silver wolf banners that stretched from the towering ceiling to the marble floor. Every alpha, elder, and noble family from across the kingdom had gathered for the annual moon bond ceremony, a tradition older than memory itself, where fate was believed to reveal those destined to lead together. At the center of the grand chamber stood Adrian Blackwood, the youngest alpha king in generations, broad-shouldered, composed, and admired by every pair of eyes in the room. His dark suit was embroidered with the ancient crest of his bloodline, and the ceremonial silver clasp at his collar gleamed like moonlight itself. The silence around him carried the weight of expectation. Across the hall, Claire Ashford lowered her gaze as whispers floated through the crowd before she had taken more than 3 steps. Everyone knew her name, though few ever spoke it kindly. She was the quiet Omega whose wolf had awakened later than everyone else's, the girl whose gentle nature had always been mistaken for weakness, the one many believed could never stand beside a king. She wore a simple pale blue gown without jewels or expensive embroidery, her hands folded tightly to keep them from trembling. Her heart beat faster with every step toward the ancient moonstone resting between her and Adrian. She had never dreamed of crowns or power. She had only believed that the mysterious bond she had felt for years meant they would one day face life together. The elder raised his staff, and the hall fell perfectly still. By the blessing of the moon, let the destined pair stand together. Claire stopped only a few feet from Adrian. For a single heartbeat, hope warmed her tired eyes. Then Adrian looked directly at her, his expression calm, respectful, but painfully distant. "I cannot accept this bond," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the silent chamber. A ripple of astonishment swept across the guests. Claire's breath caught, though she remained perfectly still. Adrian continued without anger or cruelty, believing every word he spoke was simply the responsible choice. A Luna must inspire confidence, unite powerful packs, and stand beside a king through every challenge. Claire is kind, but kindness alone cannot protect a kingdom. I refuse this bond. No one shouted. No one protested. The silence that followed somehow hurt more than any accusation ever could. Claire felt hundreds of eyes resting upon her, measuring her worth, confirming every quiet doubt she had carried since childhood. She forced herself to lift her chin even as her vision blurred with unshed tears. She would not beg. She would not argue. Fate had already spoken once. Human choice had answered differently. The elder slowly lowered his staff, uncertainty filling his weathered face, while nobles exchanged uneasy glances and whispered predictions about who would become Adrian's future Luna instead. Claire offered the smallest respectful bow, her voice barely above a whisper yet steady enough to surprise even herself. "Then I release you from every expectation you ever feared I would place upon you, Your Majesty." Without another word, she turned toward the enormous wooden doors. Each step echoed through the vast hall until the heavy doors opened to reveal a cold spring rain waiting beyond the castle walls. She disappeared into the gray afternoon without looking back once, while inside the palace, no one realized they had just watched the future walk away, and no one, least of all Adrian Blackwood, could imagine that the quiet Omega leaving alone beneath the rain would one day return as the Luna whose very presence would command the respect of kingdoms that had never once spoken her name with kindness. Cold rain has a way of washing away illusions long before it washes away tears. Claire Ashford walked alone down the winding stone road that led away from Blackwood Keep, the castle slowly disappearing behind a curtain of grey mist as spring rain soaked through her light blue dress and loosened the strands of chestnut hair that framed her pale face. She never once turned around. There was nothing waiting for her behind those walls except memories that had ended before they were ever allowed to begin. The small leather satchel hanging from her shoulder carried everything she owned, a worn journal, a faded family photograph, a simple wool shawl, and a silver moon pendant that had belonged to her mother. It was astonishing how little remained when hope itself no longer had a place to stay. By sunset, the rain had grown colder as the forest swallowed the last signs of civilization. The road narrowed into a quiet trail surrounded by towering pine trees whose branches whispered softly whenever the wind passed through them. Claire stopped beside a small stream, kneeling to drink from the clear water before wrapping her damp shawl tighter around herself. Her body ached from exhaustion, yet the deeper pain rested somewhere words could never reach. She replayed Adrian's calm voice again and again inside her mind, not because it was cruel, but because he had sounded completely certain that leaving her behind was the correct decision. Somehow certainty hurt more than anger ever could. As darkness settled across the forest, she found shelter beneath the roof of an abandoned hunting cabin. The wooden walls creaked with age, and the fireplace had long since gone cold, but it was enough to keep the wind away. She gathered dry branches scattered beneath the porch and carefully built a small fire. The gentle flames painted warm light across the empty room, but the silence remained. For the first time since leaving the castle, Claire allowed herself to cry. No one was watching. No whispers followed her. No judgment waited behind lowered eyes. Only the quiet crackling of burning wood listened as years of disappointment finally escaped through silent tears. Hours passed before she reached into her satchel and opened the worn journal her mother had once filled with handwritten notes about courage, compassion, and faith. Between the aging pages rested a single sentence that caught her attention as though she were reading it for the very first time. Never mistake rejection for the end of your story. Sometimes it is simply destiny refusing to let you remain where you no longer belong. Claire stared at those words while the fire slowly burned. Lower. Something inside her shifted almost imperceptibly. The pain did not disappear, but it no longer felt like the only thing left inside her heart. Before dawn, she stepped outside into the cool morning air. Mist floated above the trees while birds greeted the rising sun with quiet songs. The world had continued moving forward despite everything that had happened the day before. Claire closed her eyes and took one long steady breath. If no pack wanted her, then she would discover who she was without one. If no king believed she could become a Luna, then she would become a woman who no longer needed anyone else's permission to know her own worth. With the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, she resumed walking north toward lands she had never seen, unaware that beyond distant mountains an elderly Luna, long believed to have withdrawn from the world forever, had spent weeks dreaming of a young woman whose arrival would change not only her own life, but the future of every kingdom beneath the moon. Some journeys begin the moment the world believes they have already ended. 3 weeks after leaving Blackwood Keep, Claire crossed the snow-lined border into the northern Moon Kingdom, where towering evergreens blanketed the mountains and crystal rivers reflected the pale morning sky like polished glass. The villages scattered throughout the region were smaller than those she had known, built from weathered timber and gray stone, yet every home carried an unmistakable warmth. Children laughed while gathering fresh water from the streams, merchants greeted strangers with quiet smiles, and no one lowered their voice after learning her name. For the first time in many years, Claire walked through a crowded marketplace without feeling as though every glance carried judgment. She accepted temporary work helping an elderly baker organize shelves before sunrise and sweeping the small shop each evening in exchange for simple meals and a modest room above the bakery. The work was humble, but every loaf she helped prepare and every customer she welcomed reminded her that usefulness was measured in more than titles or destiny. Weeks slowly became months. The sadness that had once followed every heartbeat gradually softened into quiet determination. Each evening she borrowed books from the village library, studying history, diplomacy, herbal medicine, and the forgotten customs of ancient Luna leaders. She listened far more than she spoke, discovering that wisdom often arrived disguised as ordinary conversation. One autumn afternoon, while returning borrowed books beneath trees painted with shades of crimson and gold, Claire noticed an elderly woman sitting alone beside a stone bridge overlooking the river. The graceful stranger wore a dark emerald cloak fastened with an elegant silver moon brooch unlike anything Claire had ever seen. Although age had traced gentle lines across her face, her bright blue eyes carried extraordinary calm, as though they had witnessed generations rise and fall without losing hope. Claire politely greeted her before continuing toward the library, but the woman spoke first. "You walk like someone carrying a burden that no one else can see." Claire stopped, surprised by the unexpected observation. She offered a faint smile before answering honestly. Perhaps I carried it for so long that I forgot how to put it down. The older woman smiled in return, neither pitying nor questioning her further. Instead, she simply invited Claire to share tea at the nearby cottage overlooking the valley. That afternoon stretched into hours of conversation unlike anything Claire had experienced before. They spoke about leadership, compassion, fear, forgiveness, and the quiet strength required to remain kind after disappointment. Not once did the woman ask who had rejected her or why she had traveled alone. It was as though she already understood that some wounds deserved patience instead of curiosity. Before sunset, the woman finally introduced herself. My name is Eleanor Ravenshade. Long ago, I served as Luna of the Northern Moon Kingdom. Claire nearly dropped her teacup. Every child had grown up hearing stories about Luna Eleanor, the wise leader who had united rival packs through diplomacy instead of pride before quietly retiring from public life years earlier. Eleanor noticed Claire's astonishment and laughed softly. Legends are only ordinary people who lived long enough for others to forget their mistakes. She then looked directly into Claire's eyes with remarkable certainty. I have been waiting for you. Claire frowned in confusion. Waiting for me? Eleanor nodded toward the distant mountains where moonlight had begun to settle across the snowy peaks. Several nights ago, I dreamed of a young woman walking alone through endless rain while carrying a broken heart that still refused to become bitter. The moon does not send such dreams without reason. If you are willing to learn, I am willing to teach. Standing beneath the fading light of the evening sky, Claire realized that the road she believed had ended at rejection had quietly become the beginning of an entirely different destiny. The greatest transformations are almost never announced with applause because they happen quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Under Eleanor Ravenshade's guidance, the passing seasons became Claire Ashford's true teachers. Winter taught patience as she climbed snow-covered mountain trails before sunrise, learning that every careful step mattered more than reckless speed. Spring taught compassion while she traveled beside Eleanor to distant villages, helping settle disagreements between neighboring packs with calm conversation instead of pride. Summer taught discipline as endless afternoons disappeared inside the ancient library, where faded journals written by generations of forgotten Lunas revealed that real leadership began with listening rather than commanding. Autumn taught humility, reminding her that every tree surrendered its brightest leaves before becoming stronger again. Years passed so naturally that Claire scarcely noticed how much she had changed until strangers began seeking her advice instead of overlooking her presence. The shy Omega who had once apologized for speaking now carried herself with quiet confidence that never demanded attention yet somehow earned it. She still wore simple clothing most days, preferred walking through the markets without an escort, and remembered the names of children, merchants, and travelers she met along the way. Eleanor often observed these moments with a knowing smile. One crisp autumn morning, after Claire patiently resolved a disagreement between two village elders over shared farmland, Eleanor placed another weathered journal into her hands. Knowledge fills the mind, she said softly, but character earns trust. Today they listened because they believed you wanted justice, not victory. Claire lowered her eyes thoughtfully. I still feel like I have so much to learn. Eleanor nodded with approval. The people who believe they have finished learning are the ones who should never be trusted with power. As another year passed, rumors began spreading beyond the borders of the Northern Moon Kingdom. Travelers spoke of a mysterious advisor whose wisdom prevented conflicts before they became wars. Merchants claimed trade routes once threatened by endless disputes had become peaceful after a single meeting with an unknown young woman. Families whispered about villages where hungry children never went without bread because someone had quietly organized neighboring packs to share their harvests before winter arrived. Curiously, no one seemed able to agree on her name. Some believed she was a wandering Luna blessed by the moon goddess. Others insisted she was a forgotten noblewoman hiding her identity. Claire never corrected any of the stories because she had learned that reputation built through actions mattered far more than recognition earned through titles. One evening, as golden sunlight faded behind the mountains, Eleanor invited Claire to the ancient moon garden where generations of northern Lunas had gathered beneath flowering silver trees. Resting upon a stone pedestal at the center of the garden was an elegant silver crest shaped like a rising crescent moon, the official symbol worn only by the kingdom's highest protector. Eleanor carefully lifted the crest before turning toward Claire with unmistakable pride shining in her gentle eyes. "When you first arrived, you believed rejection had stolen your future," she said quietly. "Now I can finally tell you what I saw from the beginning. The moon never brought you here to hide. It brought you here to prepare." Claire looked at the crest in stunned silence, her heart pounding with disbelief. Eleanor stepped forward and placed the symbol into her trembling hands. "From this day forward, you will serve beside me, not as my student, but as my successor. There will come a day when kingdoms you have never visited will ask for your guidance, and those who once measured your worth by your weakness will discover they never truly knew who you were becoming. Time has a quiet way of revealing truths that pride refuses to see." Nearly 4 years had passed since Claire Ashford crossed the northern border with nothing but a worn satchel and a heart full of unanswered questions. Far to the south, the Blackwood Kingdom remained prosperous in appearance, yet something invisible had begun slipping through the cracks of its proud foundation. Harvest festivals no longer carried the same laughter they once had. Neighboring pacts that had faithfully honored old alliances now hesitated before renewing their agreements. Minor disagreements between village leaders lingered longer than they should, slowly growing into divisions that consumed valuable trust. None of these problems alone threatened the kingdom, yet together they created a quiet uncertainty that even experienced advisors struggled to explain. Adrian Blackwood noticed the change long before anyone dared mention it aloud. Every morning began with reports spread across his oak desk, detailing trade delays, diplomatic misunderstandings, and councils that reached fewer agreements than ever before. His generals remained loyal, his people still respected him, and the kingdom itself remained peaceful, yet something essential seemed to be missing. More than once he found himself staring through the palace windows toward the distant forest where Claire had disappeared years before. He rarely spoke her name. Not because he had forgotten it, but because remembering had gradually become more painful than silence. One rainy evening, while reviewing old royal records with his trusted advisor Nathaniel Brooks, Adrian discovered a sealed investigation that had never reached his desk during the months leading up to the moon bond ceremony. Curious, he broke the aging wax seal and quietly read every page beneath the flickering candlelight. The documents revealed that several respected elders had privately praised Claire for years, describing her unusual empathy, remarkable judgment, and natural ability to calm disputes before they escalated. Another report described how she had secretly organized food deliveries for struggling families during an especially difficult winter without ever accepting recognition. A final letter, written by an elder who had since passed away, contained words that left Adrian completely still. Strength that seeks admiration often disappears when tested. Strength that quietly serves others becomes the foundation upon which kingdoms endure. Do not mistake gentleness for weakness. Adrian slowly lowered the letter, his heartbeat strangely heavy. "Why was this never presented?" he asked in a quiet voice. Nathaniel hesitated before answering honestly. "Your Majesty, at the time everyone believed political alliances mattered more than personal character. Many assumed those reports would not influence your decision." Adrian remained silent for several long moments. For the first time since becoming king, he questioned not only a single choice, but the values that had shaped it. He had measured Claire by titles she did not possess instead of qualities she had demonstrated every day. Days later, merchants arriving from the northern territories began sharing remarkable stories during evening meals inside the castle. They spoke of a mysterious young Luna whose advice had united rival pacts without raising her voice, whose presence alone inspired confidence among leaders twice her age, and whose wisdom had become sought after throughout the northern kingdoms. Some claimed she refused expensive gifts. Others insisted she traveled with only a handful of companions despite the influence she carried. No traveler could agree on every detail except one. Whenever difficult decisions threatened to divide entire regions, people waited patiently for the arrival of the woman wearing a silver crescent crest. Adrian listened without interruption, an unfamiliar feeling settling deep within his heart. He did not know why those stories lingered in his thoughts long after the conversations ended, nor could he explain why the image of Claire standing beneath the rain returned to him more vividly with each passing day. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a woman he had once believed too fragile to stand beside a king was quietly becoming the leader that kingdoms trusted when every other answer had failed. The moment destiny returns, it rarely announces itself with words. It arrives with silence that changes every heart in the room. Early one winter morning, elegant royal messengers rode across every kingdom carrying invitations sealed with silver wax bearing the crest of the High Council of Alphas. After years of growing disagreements over trade, borders, and cooperation, every ruling Alpha and Luna had been summoned to the grand summit of Moonfall Hall, a gathering held only when the future of the kingdoms demanded unity above pride. Adrian Blackwood studied the invitation carefully inside his private chamber before fastening his dark ceremonial cloak across his shoulders. The final line caught his attention more than any other. A newly appointed High Luna of the Northern Moon Kingdom would serve as the chief mediator for the council. Nathaniel quietly observed his king reading the parchment for several moments before speaking. They say no ruler has declined her guidance once they have met her. Adrian folded the letter with measured calm. Then perhaps we will finally discover why everyone speaks of her as though she were a legend. 2 days later, the towering marble halls of Moonfall Palace welcomed leaders from every corner of the continent. Massive silver chandeliers reflected against polished stone floors while banners representing dozens of ancient packs swayed gently beneath the vaulted ceiling. Courtiers moved gracefully between the arriving delegations, announcing each kingdom with formal precision. Adrian entered surrounded by his royal advisors, greeting familiar rulers with quiet respect, yet he could not ignore the unusual atmosphere filling the chamber. Powerful alphas who normally carried themselves with effortless confidence seemed unexpectedly patient, as though everyone were waiting for the arrival of someone whose presence mattered more than rank alone. A palace attendant approached the center of the hall and struck the ceremonial silver staff against the marble floor 3 times. The sound echoed through the vast chamber before absolute silence settled over every conversation. Please rise to welcome Her Excellency, High Luna of the Northern Moon Kingdom. Every eye turned toward the enormous carved doors at the far end of the hall. They opened slowly, revealing brilliant winter sunlight spilling across the polished floor before a small delegation entered with graceful confidence. At their center walked a woman wearing an elegant ivory cloak trimmed with silver embroidery. A crescent-shaped crest rested over her heart, catching the light with every measured step she took. She carried no crown, no jeweled scepter, and no display of unnecessary grandeur. She did not need them. Her quiet composure alone transformed the atmosphere of the room. Without hesitation, the rulers standing closest to the entrance bowed their heads respectfully. One after another, leaders from neighboring kingdoms followed until nearly the entire assembly acknowledged her arrival with genuine admiration rather than obligation. Adrian remained perfectly still, unable to understand why the woman's familiar posture stirred memories he had spent years trying to bury. Then she reached the center of the hall and slowly lowered the hood of her cloak. Soft chestnut hair framed a calm, confident face no longer shadowed by uncertainty. Her blue eyes carried kindness that had matured into quiet strength, while every movement reflected the assurance of someone who had earned respect through wisdom instead of authority. Time itself seemed to stop. Adrian forgot the conversations around him, the crowded chamber, even the purpose of the summit. There was only the impossible truth standing a few yards away. Claire Ashford calmly greeted the gathered rulers with a warm, steady voice that filled the magnificent hall without effort. Thank you all for accepting the invitation. I hope our time together will strengthen every kingdom represented here. She did not search for Adrian's eyes. She did not hesitate. She simply began fulfilling the responsibility she had been entrusted with, while Adrian stood frozen beneath the silver banners, realizing that the quiet Omega who had once walked away alone beneath the rain had returned as the woman every kingdom now trusted to lead them toward peace. Respect earned through quiet character has a way of silencing every memory built upon misunderstanding. The opening session of the summit unfolded with remarkable calm as rulers from every kingdom presented their concerns before the council. Claire Ashford listened far more than she spoke, taking careful notes while allowing every Alpha and Luna the opportunity to explain their perspective without interruption. Whenever disagreements threatened to slow the discussion, she asked one thoughtful question instead of offering immediate answers, and somehow the tension dissolved before pride had the chance to take control. Adrian watched from across the circular council chamber, unable to reconcile the composed woman before him with the gentle Omega he had once believed too fragile to stand beside a throne. She had not become colder. She had become stronger without losing the kindness he had failed to value years earlier. During the midday recess, nobles and advisors gathered throughout the palace gardens overlooking frozen fountains and snow-covered hedges, quietly discussing the extraordinary wisdom displayed by the northern High Luna. Many had expected authority. Few had expected humility. Adrian remained standing beneath a stone archway for several minutes before finally gathering the courage to cross the garden. Claire was studying an old map spread across a marble table with representatives from 3 neighboring kingdoms, patiently helping them identify a trade route that would benefit every territory involved instead of favoring only one. When the meeting concluded, the delegates thanked her warmly before departing, leaving the garden peacefully quiet. Adrian approached slowly, his heartbeat far less steady than he cared to admit. Claire looked up as his footsteps reached the table. Her expression remained warm, professional, and perfectly composed. "Your Majesty," she said with a respectful nod. "It has been many years." Adrian returned the greeting almost automatically. "It certainly has." For a brief moment neither of them spoke. Winter sunlight filtered through bare branches, casting delicate patterns across the snow between them. Adrian searched for the words he had rehearsed countless times in his imagination, only to discover that none of them seemed worthy of the moment. "Claire," he finally said softly, "I hardly recognized you." A gentle smile touched her face, not with pride, but with quiet understanding. Most people recognize change only after it has already happened. Her answer carried no bitterness, only simple truth. Adrian lowered his eyes before speaking again. "The woman I met today possesses extraordinary wisdom. I cannot help wondering how much I failed to see all those years ago." Claire rested one hand lightly against the edge of the stone table before answering. "We were both younger then. You made the decision you believed was best for your kingdom. I chose to discover who I could become without depending on anyone else's judgment. In different ways, we both continued walking forward." Her calm generosity only deepened the weight pressing against Adrian's heart. "I have learned things recently," he admitted. "Reports that never reached me. The truth about your kindness, your work among our people, everything you quietly accomplished long before the ceremony." Claire listened without interruption. "I should have known," Adrian continued. "I measured strength by appearance and position instead of character. I believed leadership belonged only to those who looked powerful. I was wrong." Silence settled comfortably between them. There was no accusation in Claire's eyes, no desire to make him relive his regret. She simply regarded him with the compassion of someone who had already made peace with yesterday. "Regret can become a prison," she said gently, "or it can become a teacher. The choice belongs to the person carrying it." Before Adrian could respond, the palace bells announced the beginning of the afternoon council. Claire inclined her head. Politely. "The kingdoms are waiting, Your Majesty." She gathered her documents and walked back toward the grand hall with steady confidence, leaving Adrian standing alone beneath the winter sky, holding not the pain of rejection anymore, but the humbling realization that the greatest leader he had ever met was the very woman he had once believed was not enough. True forgiveness is revealed not when life is easy, but when the people who once overlooked your worth suddenly need your wisdom the most. On the second morning of the summit, a thick blanket of snow covered the palace gardens while anxious conversations filled the council chamber long before the official session began. Messengers from several frontier villages had arrived before dawn carrying reports that an unusually harsh winter had frozen important mountain passes connecting 3 neighboring kingdoms. Supply caravans transporting grain, medicine, and firewood had been forced to stop, leaving thousands of families uncertain whether enough provisions would reach them before the cold deepened. The atmosphere inside Moonfall Hall shifted immediately. Every ruler proposed a different solution. Some argued for protecting only their own territories until spring. Others insisted existing trade agreements made cooperation impossible under the current conditions. Voices gradually grew louder, not from hostility, but from fear of making the wrong decision while time continued slipping away. Claire remained silent until every leader had spoken. She slowly stood from her seat, walked toward the large map displayed at the center of the chamber, and studied the mountain routes with thoughtful concentration. Instead of criticizing anyone's proposal, she calmly began asking questions. Which villages still had full grain reserves? Which rivers remained navigable despite the snow? Which packs possessed the strongest teams for transporting supplies through forest trails rather than mountain roads? As each answer emerged, she quietly rearranged colored markers across the map until an entirely different network of routes appeared before the council. She suggested that every kingdom temporarily share resources according to immediate need rather than political borders, allowing each region to contribute its greatest strength instead of protecting every possession. Her proposal required trust instead of competition, yet every calculation had been carefully considered. The room gradually fell silent as experienced advisors realized her plan would shorten delivery times, reduce unnecessary travel, and ensure no village would be left without assistance. Adrian watched with growing admiration as rulers who had argued only minutes earlier now nodded in agreement, not because Claire demanded obedience, but because she had reminded them that leadership existed to serve people before pride. The High Council unanimously approved the proposal, and messengers departed before noon carrying coordinated instructions to every participating kingdom. As the meeting concluded, one elderly alpha rose slowly from his seat. His silver hair reflected the afternoon light as he looked around the chamber before speaking with quiet conviction. Many years ago we believed strength belonged to the loudest voice or the strongest title. Today we have witnessed something greater. We have witnessed leadership that allows every kingdom to stand taller together. Without hesitation, he bowed respectfully toward Claire. One after another, the remaining rulers followed his example until the entire council honored her with sincere gratitude. Claire accepted the gesture with humility, offering only a gentle smile before thanking everyone for their willingness to cooperate. She claimed no personal victory and accepted no unnecessary praise. Later that evening, Adrian found Nathaniel standing beside the palace balcony overlooking the snow-covered valley. The kingdom lights shimmered peacefully beneath the winter sky. Adrian remained quiet for a long moment before speaking. She could have ignored us after everything that happened. Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. She did not return because she needed recognition. She returned because innocent families depended on wise decisions. Adrian looked toward the illuminated council chamber where Claire continued reviewing reports with delegates from distant kingdoms long after the formal meeting had ended. He finally understood the difference between earning authority through a crown and earning influence through character. Years earlier he had believed Claire was too gentle to help lead a kingdom. Now that same gentleness had united rulers who had struggled for years to trust one another. In that quiet realization, Adrian recognized that the woman he had once released from his future had become the very reason countless other futures would be protected. The most beautiful endings are not the ones where the past disappears, but the ones where the future becomes greater than the pain that came before it. The grand summit of Moonfall Hall concluded 3 days later with agreements that historians would later describe as the beginning of a new era of cooperation among the kingdoms. Trade routes were restored through shared responsibility, emergency aid was organized across borders, and leaders who had once viewed one another as rivals departed with renewed trust. As royal delegations prepared to return home, the palace gradually grew quieter beneath a clear winter sky where fresh snow reflected the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Before leaving, Adrian Blackwood asked if Claire Ashford would allow him a final conversation. She accepted with the same calm grace that had guided every moment of the summit. They met in the moon garden where silver trees stood peacefully against the white landscape, the same kind of quiet place where honest words seemed easier to find. For several moments they simply walked together along the stone path without speaking. Adrian finally broke the silence. For years I believed becoming a better king meant learning new strategies, strengthening alliances, and protecting my borders. I never realized the greatest lesson would come from the person I failed to understand. Claire looked toward the snow resting gently upon the garden branches before answering. Life has a way of teaching all of us through unexpected teachers. Adrian stopped walking and faced her with complete sincerity. I owe you an apology that should have been spoken long ago. I judged your value without truly knowing your heart. I believed kindness was weakness when it was actually the strength our world needed most. I cannot change what happened, but I wanted you to hear those words from me. Claire studied his face quietly, seeing not the proud young alpha who had rejected her years earlier, but a man who had allowed humility to reshape his character. She smiled gently. Thank you, Adrian. I accepted that truth long before today. Carrying resentment would only have kept both of us trapped in a story that was already finished. Her forgiveness arrived without hesitation because it had never depended upon his apology. It had been growing quietly inside her ever since she chose healing instead of bitterness. Adrian released a slow breath, feeling a burden lift from his heart that he had carried for far longer than he realized. May I ask you one question? Claire nodded. Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been if I had made a different choice? She reflected for a moment before answering with peaceful certainty. Sometimes. But then I remember that every step, even the painful ones, led me to become the woman standing here today. If I changed the beginning, I might lose everything I learned along the way. Adrian smiled sadly, yet there was gratitude within that smile instead of regret alone. He understood that love could not be built upon wishing yesterday had been different. It could only honor the people both of them had become. As the royal carriages departed one by one, Claire stood beside Eleanor Ravenshade watching the final delegation disappear beyond the palace gates. Eleanor quietly asked, "Do you believe your journey has reached its ending?" Claire gently shook her head. No. I think it has finally reached its true beginning. Above them, the full moon slowly appeared in the pale winter sky, shining with the same quiet light that had watched over a frightened young Omega walking alone through the rain years before. The difference was that she no longer searched for someone else to tell her she was worthy. She had discovered that worth through courage, compassion, and unwavering character. Long after stories of kings, councils, and great summits faded into history, people continued telling another story to their children, the story of the gentle woman who proved that the strongest heart is not the one that never breaks, but the one that chooses kindness after it has been broken, and beneath the same faithful moon her legacy continued to remind every generation that true strength is gentle, true leadership serves others, and the greatest destiny often begins the moment the world believes it has ended.